Welcome to DAO Deep Dives, where we interview DAO founders, core DAO contributors, and everyone else who works on the periphery of decentralized autonomous organizations.
Cool. Awesome. Welcome, guys. Another episode of DAO Deep Dives. Today we are talking to Daniel about ThriveCoin and maybe other things. Welcome, Daniel.
Hey, great to be here.
Glad to have you. This is a project which I am very excited about. I have learned about ThriveCoin from Sven in Davos, Switzerland in January of this year when I impromptu interviewed him. Very short interview, just like completely different from this. But ever since, been quite excited about this, been lurking in the background and following what you guys are doing. So hopefully you can give us some insight into what ThriveCoin is all about. But before we get there, who are you? You were born, you're here now. What happened in between?
Got it. So you want me to go that far back?
You can do it fast.
Let's see. The high level is I've been really inspired my entire adult life by this idea of building what I've grown to call contribution economies. So worlds in which people contribute value to their communities, and what they get in return is something more intrinsically meaningful and extrinsically valuable than a dollar. And I had wonderful opportunity to experiment with that idea within the context of two organizations that I founded before ThriveCoin. One was in the philanthropic technology world, and the other was in the enterprise culture space. And both of those organizations saw a lot of learning, a good amount of scale. And after we exited the second organization about 2.5 years ago, I took a step back and looked at the blockchain. And I'd gotten into Bitcoin in 2013. I was one of those guys who read Satoshi's white paper and went, oh my gosh, this is the future. And when I took another deep look, I realized that the stuff that I've been thinking about and that I've been building with others for the last many years, like the last 15 years, we could do in a way that was bigger and badder and more robust within the context, not just of blockchain and smart contracts, but within the context of DAO communities as well. And thus, we decided to found this organization called ThriveCoin. Do you want me to tell you more about ThriveCoin?
Amazing. Yeah. Give us like the elevator pitch. What is ThriveCoin?
I'll do a little more than an elevator pitch. It'll be like the 2-minute elevator. So first, you should know our vision, because our vision is really my vision. It's something that I've thought a lot about and cared a lot about for many years. And I believe that it's shared by much of the Web3 community, which is we believe in a world where real equity is possible, where it doesn't matter who you are or where you are or what your background is. If you create value, you should be rewarded proportionate to the value you create. And again, this is an ideal that we believe strongly is shared by pretty much anybody in the DAO space and even the larger Web3 space. But the problem is that's actually not what's happening in DAOs today, right? DAOs, even think about the name, like decentralized autonomous organization, except that DAOs aren't decentralized at all. There was a study done recently that showed that 1% of token holders hold 90% of voting power. Imagine if you compare that to your centralized counterparts, right? Imagine if in the US democracy, which many people believe is broken, 1% of voters held 90% of voting power. Would we think that there was something wrong there? Autonomous, the idea of protocols over people, but the reality is that people are required to power protocols. And then organization. Anybody who's been around DAOs knows that we've got a lot of work to do to look like and feel like a well-functioning, efficient organization. And so the funny thing about DAOs is that we have this ideal, and this ideal right now is obfuscated by the reality that we're not doing it that well. And I believe that the reason that we're not doing it that well has little to do with our intentions, right? Our intentions, generally speaking, are pretty pure. And it has a lot to do with technology, which is to say that the technology has not existed until ThriveCoin to reward, to recognize distributed, decentralized, largely anonymous communities, right? Because within the context of DAOs, people are creating value all over the place and in all kinds of different ways, right? On Web3 platforms, on Web2 platforms, IRL, and they're doing it anonymously. So how the heck do you reward them? And diving a little bit deeper into the problem, there are a couple pieces of that. The first is that you have to figure out how to auto-validate any of, theoretically, millions of ways in which people contribute. It's the only way you can reward people at scale on all kinds of platforms. The second is that you have to figure out how to auto-reward them with stuff that they value, that they care about. Usually it's native tokens, but it could be other stuff. Often it's digital assets. And then the third is that you've got to actually put it on chain. I'll just say a little bit about that third piece because it's nutty, right? Like we built this thing called the blockchain, but in Web3, it's not Web3. It's more like Web2 on behalf of Web3, right? Like we interact on Discord, not on chain. Discourse, not on chain. Twitter, not on chain. All the stuff we do at conferences, not on chain. Right. So there's this opacity in the DAO environment that sort of needs to be replaced with transparency. So that's the problem. And in short, what we decided to do was build a protocol that solves that problem, that supports communities in auto-validating any of, theoretically, up to millions of ways in which their community members contribute, but practically more like hundreds or thousands. We then support them in auto rewarding community members with their native token or with another digital asset that community members value. And then we make sure that everything, regardless of whether it's Web3, Web2, or IRL, is recorded on chain.
That's great. We usually ask guests, what is a DAO? What is their own interpretation of a DAO? Not necessarily the definition. So feel free just to take that one. What's your interpretation of a DAO?
Yeah, I think I already shared with you what I think is going on within DAOs. They say they're decentralized, they're not. They're autonomous, they're not. They're organizations, they don't look a lot like organizations, at least not yet, right? When there are great ideas in the world, sometimes it takes a lot of iterations to figure out how to match our values with reality. What I think optimally a DAO is deeply aligned with what I believe our vision is for a future of humanity where value is created and distributed, which is a DAO supports a world where real equity is possible, where it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what your background is. If you create value for the community, you're rewarded proportionate to the value you create. Currently, that's not the world that we live in, right? Those of us who had certain geographic advantages, education advantages, that were born of a certain gender, that all kinds of stuff, right? We have a much greater likelihood of being valued for the work that we do than everybody else. And the impact of that is that all kinds of value is left on the table in our communities, right? So many people can create so much value, but they're not given the opportunity to do so. And what DAOs do, theoretically what they do, and what I think we're all trying to support them in doing practically, is they change that. They allow community members to contribute and to contribute from a place of equity. It doesn't matter who they are, where they are, what their background is. The problem currently is they actually don't reward and recognize community members mostly for the contributions that they make. And that's what we're trying to solve.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. I can hear you have thought about this very deeply, and it shows like all your life, I think. And I absolutely love it. I think we need more of that mentality in the DAO space for sure. But that is a ginormous nut to crack, right? Like auto validating contribution and auto rewarding. I want to go there a little bit more for sure.
Sure.
Tell us what your approach for that is today, and I'm sure there is a ginormous vision for it, how this can actually scale, because you mentioned hundreds, potentially thousands, maybe tens of thousands types of contributions.
Yeah, for sure. So Today, we believe that we can support over 50% of all Web3 activity, regardless of where it is. And we believe that within a year, we'll be able to support over 90% of all Web3 activity. And to be clear, when I say support, auto validate with bot and bad actor protection, and then auto reward. And so currently we can auto validate any of, depending on the platform, let's say dozens or hundreds of types, ways in which people can contribute across everything from Twitter to Discord to Discourse to Snapshot to Bounty Board to Sobel to Gitcoin. The list goes on and on. And it's getting bigger every day. And going forward, what we're seeking to do is effectively be connective tissue for the Web3 and DAO ecosystem, which is that we want to meet people where they are. In a sense, we're agnostic about what communities decide is valuable for them. What's important to us is that we support communities in equitably rewarding value when it's created by community members. And to do that, it means that we've got to be great connective tissue. We've got to understand the Web3 ecosystem wherever it is, and we've got to be there too.
So there's an element to this where you measure and then you quantify and qualify, right? So are you currently in the stage of quantifying, or can you already qualify contribution?
So the way that we work with communities is we work with communities to set up what most communities call an advisory board. Sometimes they call it a committee, subcommittee, guild, something like that. And that board consists of a group of people who are really trusted by the community and who represent distinct constituencies. And the job of that board is effectively threefold. The first is to choose the contributions that are rewarded, the ways to contribute that will get rewards. The second is to choose how those contributions are validated. And the third is to effectively look at rewards and based on supply and demand, shift the value of rewards as is appropriate in the community. And in order to get that job done, they do two things. The first is that they get feedback constantly from the community about what their needs are, what their desires are, what they think is valuable. And the second is that they get feedback from data that we provide to them that exists from all the contributions that people are already making. And based on feedback from the community and based on data, the job of the board on an ongoing basis is to keep refining and refining, evolving, adding contributions, sometimes taking them away, shifting reward amounts based on what's going on within the community as well. So in a sense, we are both quantifying and qualifying, but it's a larger we. It in fact is the community that's doing that work, which is really important from our perspective because we don't want to be the arbiters of value within a community. That's actually an impossible task. Instead, we want to provide the tools for community members to step up and take that role and that responsibility. And that's worked out well for us.
So I think many DAOs approach what they're doing with bounties. And I think a lot of the listeners to this podcast are obviously familiar with that. Does this augment that? How does this work alongside bounties? How do you see that working?
Yeah, we integrate with Bounty Board and reward people for using Bounty Board. Bounties are a little bit different from what we do. Bounties are usually they're manually validated. They tend to be manually rewarded. We don't do specifically like task management either. And we integrate when there are task management needs. Again, we'll support platforms. They really want to focus on that and do that really well. So we do support bounties, and often we support bounties through platforms that really care about doing only bounties and doing that really well.
So do you see yourself or the solution needing to get around micromanaging a community in order to reward individuals? I guess this solves that. Do the boards you mentioned still need micromanaging?
They don't. What on the board side, It is valuable for boards to get best practices, which we launched with Bankless DAO in mid-October. And 3 months later, we got one of the biggest grants in, I think, DAO history from ApeCoin. And we've continued to support more and more communities from there. And so we're still relatively young. And what that means is that we're getting more, our data set is increasing and increasing. And alongside that, we are developing more and more best practices. So we try to make best practices available for boards. But again, we truly believe that each community deserves autonomy. And it's really important for them to make decisions on their own. The other thing that I'll say about bounty boards is one of the problems that's often reported is it's really hard to maintain them. This comes back to sort of the automation piece. If you're talking about a community of dozens of people and they're really devoted and dedicated, sure, it's fairly easy to maintain that. But when you're talking about a community of thousands or tens of thousands, hopefully in the future, hundreds of thousands or millions of active people, there is no way to maintain incentivizing community members without automation. You just can't do it unless they're going to decide to create such expensive and intensive organizational infrastructure. And at that point, why not go create a C Corp?
So you mentioned Bankless there. At ETH Denver, I talked to Above Average Joe, who is quite involved in the ThriveCoin implementation at Bankless. And I think this is even highlighted on your website. They have seen like a 50 to 90% increase in contribution and the rewards systems they've used compared to what they have tried before, which is remarkable. And it's quite a big community. Can you highlight more on that example and or other success stories which you have already seen through ThriveCoin?
Yeah, in a world in DAOs where we estimate somewhere around 1% of value creating contributions are actually rewarded, we're now rewarding over 80% of active contributors to Bankless DAO. In a world where the contributor count and contribution count of DAO communities is at best staying flat and in most cases going down, and you elucidated some of it, we've seen the opposite with Bankless DAO. And in a world where top contributors are burnt out, right, and just hanging on, we've seen a 41% increase in contributions from top contributors. So Bankless DAO, it's a really fun one, right? And we've got the most data from it because we started with them in mid-October. But yeah, we launched with Boring Security, which is an NFT security DAO and nonprofit a couple months ago. And it's been insane. They have whatever it is, I think it's like 450 active contributors on a monthly basis now. And if you go look at most massive DAOs and see how many active contributors they have on Discourse, you're going to see something between 40 and 100. And this tiny NFT security DAO nonprofit is just crushing it. And over again, we're seeing similar kinds of experiences, and it shouldn't be surprising, right? Because if it's the case that people are incentivized, that are actually rewarded for the work that they do, what are the chances that they're going to create greater utility, greater efficiency, and greater value? Imagine if Google didn't reward people for working on their search engine algorithm. How good would it be? Imagine if the employees of the city of Denver didn't reward people for cleaning up the streets. How clean would they be? Like, I love that you laughed because it's laughable that here we are and we're trying to reimagine how humans work. And yet we have been unwilling/unable to pay them. That's absurd. And when we figure out how to do that and how to do that well, we've got to imagine, and we believe that we're building a data set that demonstrates this. We've got to imagine that we're going to create a level of efficiency, utility, and value that's fundamentally distinct from what we've been able to do before.
So you talked a lot about rewards. I want to get to ThriveCoin, how it works, what is it exactly? But in your opinion, how do rewards differ from incentives, let's say?
That's a really good question. People are incentivized in different ways, and this is something we have thought a lot about. And an oversimplification of this is that there are extrinsic motivators and intrinsic motivators, right? So extrinsic motivators are like, I'm going to get this thing that I find valuable. And intrinsic motivators are, I'm going to feel this way that is valuable for me or meaningful for me to feel. And we believe strongly that both are important. Now, if a community does an airdrop, that's an extrinsic motivator. It might feel good to get a bunch of tokens too, but there's not a focus on the intrinsic piece at all. And so again, an oversimplification of the way that we've addressed this is that we do two things when we reward and recognize people for the contributions that they make to their community. The first is that they get rewarded usually with a native token. That's pretty cool. The second is that they actually get a thank you note for every contribution that they've made. And we even built our own blockchain explorer, our own version of Etherscan. So that thank you note is actually displaying real on-chain data that's been recorded, that records what the contribution you made, when it was made, what the reward was, all of that stuff, boom, in the form of a thank you note. And it says, hey, thank you. And a little note pops up out of an envelope, and it's pretty cool. But that's intrinsic motivation. And depending on the person that you talk to, they're going to be somewhere on the spectrum, right? Some people are highly motivated by extrinsic motivators, and other people are highly motivated by intrinsic motivators. And so it's really important to cover that spectrum.
So is the Thrivecoin itself an ERC20 token? Is this just a representation of value in some other way? How do we think about this? What's the technology behind it? What are you using? It sounds like it's on-chain.
Okay, great. So we have a token, I'll put it in quotes, a token called Thrive. And Thrive is a testnet Mumbai network ERC20 token. So being testnet, that means Thrivecoin has no value. Super important to make that point. Thrive has no value. And so the way in which communities use Thrive is if it's the case that they don't have a native token, or for whatever reason they don't want to use their own token, then they can use this testnet token. And Thrive acts as a raffle ticket. And the way it works is that we think in terms of seasons. People make contributions over the course of a season, just like in baseball, just like in gaming, right? And at the end of a season, if a community uses testnet tokens, they have a raffle. And they raffle off all kinds of things that are meaningful and important to community members. And your chances of winning a raffle are the amount of Thrive that you've earned divided by the total amount of Thrive earned by the community over the course of the season.
That makes a lot of sense. In a way, you're providing the framework for the communities to then use whatever reward vehicle they want to use, right? If someone wanted to, they could plug in USDC or their own or whatever.
They can do whatever they want. So it's really what community members find valuable. And it's interesting because different communities have different philosophies. So some communities don't want to map one-to-one the reward with the contribution. And so using Thrive as a raffle ticket feels better for them because it's not one-to-one. They want to overemphasize on the intrinsic motivators. Other communities want to overemphasize on the extrinsic motivators, and a bunch are in the middle. And it's really important for us, again, to be agnostic. We value what communities value, and we want to make sure that they have the tools to appropriately demonstrate that, to show that to their communities.
How does Thrive help communities to strike the balance between individual contributions and fostering like the collective decision making, which I think is a big point of many DAOs?
Okay, so let me see if I understand the question. So how do we strike the balance between somebody doing something because they think it's valuable and somebody doing something because the community thinks it's valuable? Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I guess in a way, if you want to lean into the maybe more negative side of human nature. How does Thrivecoin help minimizing individual gain, right? Like by just optimizing towards reward from individuals versus promoting action in the community, which helps the point of the community.
I think I understand your question, and let me know if I don't answer it. The way that I might reframe your question is I think what you're asking is, how do we ensure that we're not rewarding community members who are optimizing for their own personal gain instead of rewarding community members who are optimizing for the aggregate gain of the community? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So we built bot and bad actor protection into the core architecture and infrastructure of the whole freaking thing. So we actually have 5 layers of bot and bad actor protection that ensure that we're not just rewarding contributions, we're actually rewarding value creating contributions. And there's a really big difference between the two, right? There are a number of platforms or protocols out there like that do quote unquote user acquisition. Look, go on a quest. You've got 6,000 new users. What does that mean? Is that valuable? Maybe. Or maybe it was 6,000 people who clicked a couple buttons because they wanted XP. From a community perspective, I believe strongly that what communities want is value creating contributions. That's the feedback that we've gotten. And so as a result, it's our duty to ensure that's the case. And there are lots of examples of bot and bad actor protection that I can give you, but the one sort of obvious one is that we have 2 types of validation criteria: those that are known by the community and those that are not known, those that are only known by the board. And for example, if there was one type of contribution that was like, make a valuable reply to a proposal, a governance proposal, the fear of any community is somebody's just going to say GM exclamation point. And what we do is we have the known criteria, which would be have 10 likes or more. And then the unknown criteria might be, I'm making this up, they must come from at least 1 level 3 contributor and 2 level 2 contributors. And how do you build a bot against that? And even if you do, even if you somehow guess the validation criteria, we built the tech so flexibly that we can change it in minutes.
You mentioned level 2 or level 3 contributors there. That sounds to me instantly some sort of reputation mechanism. Is that how we have to think about that for Thrivecoin?
Ooh, so it again, this comes back to what are the desires of the community. So if it's the case that the community cares about reputational capital as a validation criteria, then yes. If it's the case that community prefers validation criteria to exist on other levels or other planes, then we can support that as well. So I was just giving reputational capital, which I'm glad you pointed that out, as an example of one way of thinking about validation criteria.
You're in this space every single day. You're seeing things unfold in real time. What's like a hot take or what's extremely interesting to you that you see evolving into something that's actually going to change the world?
The obvious hot take that comes to mind is that we've got to figure out how to incentivize, how to effectively pay people for the work that they do. And when we're able to do that effectively, which is not just a Thrivecoin thing, to be clear, like we think we're one important piece of the puzzle, but there are also a bunch of other parts of that stack too. And when we're able to do that effectively, it changes the game, right? Because now you have potentially 1 million people working daily on behalf of a cause that they care about. What's the kind of value that they can create? And you compare that today, there are DAOs that might have a multi-billion-dollar market cap, and they've got 100 people working daily on behalf of a cause that they care about, right? That is fundamentally game-changing for this space. And ultimately, when we talk about sustainability in a community, or for that matter, a token price, right? It comes down to utility. Can we create value for each other? And if the answer is heck yeah, and we can actually create value at levels of multiples that existed before, that's game changing. That requires more people and better people, right? And how do we do that? We figure out how to incentivize them at scale.
So, as much as I'm in love with this, and you're so spot on, I talk about utility all the time and creating value in society beyond our consumerism kind of culture, right? Which hopefully we go there as people, as humans on this planet over time. I'm afraid it will take a little while, but I see DAOs as a big mover and opportunity for this space. And those are the big questions we're trying to do our part in society. But what I would love to know is, for someone like yourself who works in this space all the time, you think about DAOs all the time. What's the craziest idea over the last recent times you had, which you think this should be a DAO?
Oh, God. What's the craziest idea that I had should be a DAO? So I was lucky enough yesterday to hang out with somebody named Amanda Knox, and then a little bit later hear her tell her story. And if you guys don't know her story, she was the person who was accused of murdering her roommate in Italy back, whatever it was, 13 or 14 years ago. And ultimately, she was convicted by a jury in a small town in Italy and served about 4.5 years in prison before that conviction was overturned. And eventually, the Supreme Court did the final overturning of that conviction, at which time they said there's literally no evidence that supported this conviction. And what I was thinking about after hearing her story, and also after getting an opportunity to talk to her, and she's a wonderful, authentic human being, was, oh my gosh, the Innocence Project, which has figured out how to save, at this point, I think it's hundreds of people's lives, people who were wrongfully convicted. The Innocence Project is a small group of lawyers and advocates who effectively donate their time and their love to freeing wrongfully incarcerated people. And what would happen if we had a really big community of people all over the world who were passionate about a similar cause and could pool funds to support that cause and could pool capability to support those investigations? Could we go from maybe freeing hundreds of innocent people to thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands? And how might that change the way that we think of justice and justice reform in the future?
Yeah. So I do want to point something out to our listeners here. In this very short amount of time we were hanging out with you, it is very clear that you're a fantastic person, because you can't even help yourself to give us a crazy idea. You go with a world-changing one again.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for, right? Is that sort of response. So yeah, I definitely appreciate it. I think Sven, surely like myself, was reminded of conversations with our friend Renee Pinnell, who worked on Free Ross DAO and as Ross's friend from their childhood. Luckily, Amanda is free. I think there was like a documentary on Netflix for those that want to look into that a little bit further, and sounds like an absolutely fascinating story. But you're right. Wow, that's definitely world changing, freeing that many wrongly convicted people. That'd be huge.
Let's just riff on this for a little bit. So many great use cases in the world are obvious fit for DAOs if
Right.
they evolve into what we think they can be, right?
Yeah, I think one that's fun to think about is, okay, in 50 years from now, what's a DAO that we use every day? Or it's, of course, that's a DAO. That is definitely not a DAO today, right? Like that sort of thing. Do you ever think about those in the future?
I don't think about it that way, but I love that sort of way of framing it, because the first thing that comes to mind when you say that is education reform, right? Right now, we think about education from at least in the aggregate, it's still a very empirical thing. There's a way in which it works, and either it works for people or it doesn't work for people. And if there existed the wisdom of communities and of educators to experiment with different educational concepts for different groups of people that have different kinds of needs, oh my gosh, there's so much that we could do with that. And I know that when I was in school, I learned in very different ways than most people did. I needed to conceptually understand things, otherwise I could not remember them. But if I could conceptually understand it, then it stood with me forever. And what I noticed about most teachers is that they taught facts, right? They taught you how to do something, but they didn't teach you why, like at a deep level why. And maybe I was a slightly different learner from the majority of people, but there are a lot of slightly different learners. And I think there are ways in which DAO communities can really support and serve those people too.
Yes. As someone who has children in school and wishes that it was different, all from not only what they're studying to what they're eating to the way that the structure takes place, I couldn't agree with you more. And wanting and desiring, like even things like EQ to be more taught in school as well from an early age as their brains are still forming, right? We should be teaching them not just here's the facts, here's how to live as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like there are a bunch of, I'll share a study, and there are a bunch of studies that have shown the same thing. So there was a study done in Israel, this is decades ago, where they had a bunch of new recruits for the military, and they had done a bunch of tests and figured out who the most likely future leaders were, the most likely high performers. And they let the leaders know. And sure enough, fast forward a couple of years, they were the high performers. Exactly right. There was, of course, only one problem, which was all the tests that were done were shredded and thrown in the trash, and those people were randomly selected.
Yeah, it sounds right.
And
just nurtured, right?
Right. And so if we understand, right, if we understand that all of us are that capable, like all of us are that capable, then what does it mean for us as mentors, as educators, as bosses, as friends, to be able to support that in others? And in school environments, some people report getting that, but it's a very small percentage of people who report having that kind of support.
Brilliant. To wrap it back to ThriveCoin, so obviously I can see where you came up with the name. Is this its current iteration you feel very comfortable with? Do you think this is the way that it is going to live on and expand? Are you imagining any sort of pivots in the near future from things that you've learned in the very recent past? And then to add on to that, who else are you looking to work with? Like, where do you think that your solution makes the most sense right away, where it has the most impact?
So we believe that we're at the beginning of fairly strong product market fit based on all the feedback that we're getting. And we're really excited to continue to build product in alignment with the feedback that we're getting from communities and from community members. At the same time, it is very important to state that I am agnostic ultimately about what that product looks like. I'm not agnostic about our vision. We believe in a world where real equity is possible. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what your background is. If you create value for your community, you deserve to be rewarded proportionate to the value you create. Whatever is required on the product and technology front in the future to continue to build toward that vision, that's what we're going to do. And in terms of the communities that we work with or working with or future, what the way that we're thinking right now is we feel really excited about the DAO space. We believe strongly that whether we're talking about DEXs or culture DAOs or media DAOs, we can have a very strong impact on communities. We can help communities to appropriately and effectively incentivize their community members to create value. But our technology is not just built to serve the DAO space. It's also built to serve the rest of Web3. And going forward, we're really excited to support whether it's NFTs, gaming, metaverses, etc. We just are trying to be really thoughtful and, in a sense, plotting. Even though we're going really fast, we still try to, from like a perceptual perspective, feel plotting. We're taking one step, the next step. And again, the impact we think we can make in the DAO community in a relatively short amount of time is really significant.
So how do people get involved with ThriveCoin, or do they not? Do they just get involved in these communities, deliver value, and find ThriveCoin? Is there a way to approach that for our audience? And then you can add on to that also, how does our audience find you and maybe ask questions or get in touch?
Yeah, one way to get involved with ThriveCoin is to get in touch with me or anybody else who's a part of our team, and I can give you that information later. Beyond that, we will be actively building out our community. I mean, our protocol, at some point, there will be an API that's open that allows others to build in a way that is adjacent to the work that we've done. We will open up more and more in the coming months and in the coming quarters.
Absolutely amazing. I so much appreciate you coming on the show. We said it earlier, we didn't know each other. This was just a referral of a common friend who's also working with ThriveCoin, actually. So we knew there is at least some value alignment. I can't wait to produce this episode and get it out. Yeah, thanks again. Had a blast. And if there's any parting words you want to give our audience, then go for it.
First of all, thank you. It's a ton of fun. And I really think that you guys are amazing. I'm really excited to get to know you as people and as friends, and who the heck knows what we can collaborate on in the future. Regardless, I think it'll probably be pretty fun. In terms of parting words, I really believe in the ability of any and every single person to change the world. I really fundamentally do. And we need to know ourselves and trust ourselves and be in community with a group of people who know us and trust us. And the future of DAOs in its most optimal state is to give people that opportunity. And if we, as kind of imaginers and leaders and participants in DAO communities, can help to make that future come sooner, then we've done a really incredible and special thing, not just for the people that we know and see around us, but for all the people that will be using this infrastructure in the near and the far future.
I really appreciate that moment of Zen, and just to pass that on to our listeners as well. We appreciate you. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And to Daniel, we really appreciate having you on. Till next time. Cheers.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
And that's a wrap. Sven and Solve are your hosts for DAO Deep Dives, a podcast about all things DAO. Thanks for tuning in. Till next time.